Hello everybody and welcome to today's lesson on congruence and triangles. Now we're getting to the meat of it. The objective for today is we will be able to identify congruent figures and corresponding parts. So what are congruent figures? Congruent figures have the same size and shape. All the parts of one figure are congruent to the corresponding parts of the other figure. So let's look at these two congruent triangles, and please note that the shortest side of this triangle here is on the left and the shortest side of this triangle is on the right. They don't have to be in the same orientation. These two triangles, if you look at them, you can see they have been created by reflecting one by this vertical line. And I'm going to take that line off again because this unit is not about reflection. But just to be clear and to understand that congruent figures don't have to have the same orientation. They just have to have all the corresponding parts being congruent. So starting with the shortest side here, we give them congruent marks because these two sides are congruent. And then let's move on to the longest side, which is the one here in the bottom. These two sides are also congruent. We give them congruent marks, but remember they have to be different than the congruent marks of the side that we used before. And our third side here on top, these are also congruent, and we give them 3 congruent marks. So all the 3 sides are congruent. Now let's look at the angles. Angle T here is the smallest angle of the 3, and that one is congruent to angle N. And also remember from our previous unit, the smallest angle is across from the shortest side, and that is clearly the case. Moving to our largest angle, angle A on top here is across from the longest side, and angle A is congruent to angle U. And the third and remaining angle, angle M, is across from the third side and is congruent to angle F. So as we said before, all the parts, and when we say all the parts, we mean the sides and the angles of one figure have to be congruent to the corresponding parts of the other figure. And if we find that, then we can write a congruent statement. A congruent statement tells us the figures are congruent and which parts correspond. So we can write the triangle MAT is congruent to, and now we have to be careful, so we use the denomination of the second triangle in the same order as the one of the first triangle. So see, we started with M going to A and T, so we have to start with F going to U and N. So triangle MAT is congruent to triangle FUN, and we have just proven that math is fun. All right, get it? Okay. Anyway, let's move on. Let's then talk about the corresponding parts of these two congruent triangles. And that's why it's super important that for our congruent statement, we write the angles in the correct order so we can get our corresponding parts right. Corresponding parts are a pair of sides or angles that have the same relative position in two congruent figures. Let's get them all sorted out, and let's start with the sides. So the side MA, which is our shortest side of this triangle here on the left, is corresponding and congruent to the side FU. So we can write segment MA is congruent to segment FU. Then let's look at segment AT, which was the one we marked in green. That one is congruent to segment UN. AT is congruent to UN. And our longest segment, MT, is congruent to segment FN. Let's look at our angles. Angle A, and that's the one here on the top, is congruent to angle U. You can see that either from the two pictures, or you can see it from the position that those angles have in the name of the triangle in our congruence statement. Both have to, again, be correct and reflect the same facts. So therefore, you can either look at a congruent statement or add two figures to find all the congruent parts. Angle A is congruent to angle U. Let's move to angle M. Angle M is congruent to angle F. And angle T is congruent to angle N. Let's see how we can apply these concepts to some examples. Use the pictures to write a congruent statement if possible, then list all of the congruent corresponding parts. In our first example, we see that we have the three pairs of sides with congruent marks. Then we have angles D and H being congruent, as well as angles G and F being congruent. The only thing that we haven't confirmed is angle E, actually on both sides. But if we remember our previous lessons, and if we remember the concept of vertical angles, these two angles have to be vertical, right? Because they are formed by two lines intersecting. And vertical angles always are congruent. So therefore we now have all corresponding parts marked congruent. So we can now write our congruent statement. Triangle DEG, and for our first one it doesn't matter which order we use, has to be congruent to triangle. And now we have to be careful. Since we started with angle D, we have to now start with angle H. Angle E is the same one here in the middle, and the last one is angle F. Here's our congruent statement. Now we can list all of our corresponding parts. Let's start with the sides. Segment DE is congruent to segment HE. Now stop the video here and find the other two congruent sides and compare your work with my answers afterwards. Hopefully you came up with the same result. Side EG is congruent to side EF, and side DG is congruent to side HF. Now let's look at the angles. Angle D is congruent to angle H. And again, stop the video now and find the other two corresponding parts yourself. Hopefully you also found that angle E is congruent to angle E and angle G is congruent to angle F. Actually, really, with respect to angles E, we should be a little bit more specific, and we should have written angle DEG is congruent to angle HEF. Since we're not really talking about one and the same angle, we're talking about two vertical angles. But if you said angle E is congruent to angle E, then you did find the two corresponding parts. Let's look at our second example. Our two triangles, we see they are equilateral and equiangular triangles. And if they are equiangular, all three angles are congruent in both triangles, and that also means that all the angles are congruent among each other. But we see from the congruent marks of the sides that the sides of one triangle are not congruent to the sides of the other one. So therefore, we cannot write a congruence statement. It is not possible. How else can we apply these concepts? Of course, we can do that to find missing values. In this example, find the value of x and y. Our congruent statement here on the top states that the figure ABCDE is congruent to the figure FGHIJ. As you can see, we have no little symbol in front of the letters. For any figure larger than a triangle with more vertices than a triangle, we do not need a symbol anymore. We just indicate and name that figure by listing its vertices. We are supposed to find x, and x is part of the length of the segment FG, and FG is corresponding to AB. We know that the length of the segment AB is 5, so let's use this to find x. X plus 1 has to be equal to 5. Subtract 1 from both sides, and x is equal to 4. We're supposed to find y also, and we know that 2y is the measurement of angle F. And angle F is corresponding to angle A. The measurement of angle A is 92 degrees. So then we know that 2y has to be equal to 92. Divide both by 2, and y is equal to 46. And that was that. Now go ahead and watch the second part of this tutorial.